Welcome, I am Dr. Anna Smith, and I would like to welcome you to our final session of the Creatively Critical Text Speaker Series this academic year. So I have some introductory remarks, and while I make them, I would welcome those of you joining us today to introduce yourself in the chat, and our speakers can also introduce themselves if they'd like. You can find the chat button below in the tools, and then please make sure to change the radial dial in the chat to everyone. Just make sure it's listed to everyone. And we're going to try to keep the chat open for the most dialogic experience tonight. And so please respect that and keep your comments productive. On the screen right now is me and pinned our speakers for tonight, as well as the announcement for this session with the profile pictures of our speakers, so you can see them twice, and the names of the projects they're going to be sharing tonight. So the Creatively Critical Text series comes to us from the Education Now Lab at Illinois State University in the School of Teaching and Learning. And the Education Now Lab is a community-engaged research practice lab that works with and produces a range of critical interdisciplinary, public, academic, and new media scholarship with and alongside community members as we labor toward more educational futures. So in a minute, I'll drop some links in the chat where you can find video recordings from our past sessions of both this series and the Theory Method series, which is another fabulous series from our lab. And the series is sponsored by Illinois State University Office of Research and Graduate Studies, and we thank them for the support, and we recognize in that the continuous ways that our work at Illinois State University is supported by histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution over the last 160 years. Specifically, the harm inflicted by our institution being built on the land and waterways of multiple indigenous nations who were forcibly removed, including the Illini, Peoria, and the Miami. And later, due to colonial encroachment and displacement to the multiple other indigenous nations who were removed. So we'd like to honor those indigenous people who have been excluded due to historical erasure and inaccuracy. And we are seeing currently continued sustained struggles and atrocities happening to people, lands, ways of knowledge building in so many of our current events. So I hope that we can dedicate our insights and energies gained from tonight toward action, however is best for our communities, our well-being, and our flourishing. So as this is our final session for this academic year, we're going to do something a little different. We want to begin and end with spotlights of the creative and critical humanizing scholarship and art that we get to learn with and from here at Illinois State University. And then in the middle, we'll hear from our special guest, Charles Logan, and his talk after the capture of AI literacy, teaching ecological approaches to AI. So we're going to begin with Dr. Natalie Shaheen, who I am really lucky to work with here at Illinois State University. And Dr. Shaheen uses interdisciplinary approaches to study equity and access for disabled students in technology-mediated learning environments in order to disrupt systemic ableism and to reimagine technology-mediated education as a place that values and actively makes space for disabled ways of knowing and being. And she'll be sharing with us her work on the Ally in Sci NSF Career Grant Award work. And if I didn't accurately describe that, you get to take it away and tell us all about it.
Thanks, Anna. No, that was great. And still have an NSF grant. Fingers crossed.
I wasn't sure. I didn't want to bring that up.
Yeah, if everybody can just say a little something for me, that would be great. Somehow I've made it so far through the fire. We'll find out tomorrow if that continues. You just never know these days. So real quick, let me drop I'm not so much of a screen share type of person. So let me drop a link in the chat for you. You can learn a little bit more about the project. This is, we're just wrapping up the first year of the project. So just really still in the getting started phases. But so Ally in Sci Ally is a numeronym. A11Y is a numeronym for accessibility online. So there are 11 letters between the A and the Y in accessibility, and that is why A11Y, or as I say it, Ally, is a numeronym for accessibility. So you learn something new, perhaps. The word numeronym maybe is new, or maybe you didn't know what A11Y stood for. So this project focuses, the aim is to improve the long-term accessibility of technology-mediated high school science classes. So when I say technology-mediated, I mean any space where technology is used. So that could just be, I don't know, an interactive whiteboard at the front of the room. It could be a roller coaster simulation in a physics class, or it could be Zoom, or it could be a Chromebook, God help us. Any kind of technology counts as technology mediated. And the project has two arms. The first is a research arm, and that arm is looking at what in-service teachers know about constructing born accessible technology mediated science classes. So teachers who are in high schools right now, what do they know about how to make a science class where technology is used accessible to disabled kids from the jump? The education side of the project is looking at developing opportunities for teachers to learn how to do that work, learn how to create technology-mediated high school science classes that are born accessible to disabled students. And when I say born accessible, what I'm talking about is classes that are proactively constructed to be accessible to blind and other disabled students. And that's quite different from our approach today. Our approach for decades when it comes to disabled kids has been, oh, there's going to be a blind kid in my class? Shucks. How do I make stuff work for that kid? And then do the work once the kid, maybe 2 weeks after the kid shows up. As opposed to thinking ahead about what we can do to proactively make our spaces accessible so that any kid can, come into our class, be it science or English for that matter, and just learn alongside their peers. So to be born accessible, one of the key things is that the technologies that you incorporate into your class are in compliance with the new Americans with Disabilities Act Title II regulations. Here in a second, I'll pull a link for that. I didn't think to grab that ahead of time, but in case that's news to you, those have been in place since a little over a year ago. And schools, both K-12 and higher ed, have to be in compliance with those rules by 2026. So lots of work to do. When classes, science or otherwise, are born accessible, disabled students can come in, they can learn, and they don't have to split their time between learning and negotiating access. At the moment, the way things are done, when a disabled student is in a class where technology is or not, frankly, some of their time gets to be focused on learning, but most of it is about negotiating access, reminding the teacher that they need X different thing, or letting the teacher know that Y thing isn't accessible or doesn't work for them. Those sorts of things take a lot of students' time, and then they only have a little bit left to be able to learn. So in the project, we just finished interviewing 30 high school teachers. So this the research is really looking at science teachers, high school science teachers, and high school teachers of blind students. So you may or may not know, but most blind low vision students attend public schools. And there are teachers who are specially trained to support their needs within the K-12 schools. So special ed teachers who are specifically trained to work with blind kids. So we're looking at those two groups of teachers. Just finished interviewing 30 teachers all around the country. That was fun. So we're trying to understand what they know. We'll start analyzing data here very soon. On the education side, we're also constructing a case library of stories about blind students and their teachers based on my previous qualitative research. So the idea is to take this work that's already been disseminated in scholarly publications and try to make it more approachable and accessible, like people can actually get at it for teachers, so they don't have to go digging in the scholarly literature. So we've got, it's not up yet. We're working to build out the website this summer, but some of the cases, I can give you a couple of titles of some of the cases and a quick little synopsis to give you kind of a little taste of what's going to be there. So one of the cases is called "Sometimes I Cry," and it's about how inaccessible classes teach blind students to factor accessibility into the decisions they make about what classes to take in high school. There's another case called "Simulation Frustration" that talks about how inaccessible science simulations, like a roller coaster simulation that you might encounter in a physics class, how inaccessible science simulations exclude blind students. There's another called "Speed Reader" that tells the story about how blind students use their audio speed reading capabilities to get ahead of their sighted peers. And another one called "Whiteboard Woes" that talks about how embarrassing it is for blind students when they're called on to work something out on an interactive whiteboard and have to explain to the teacher that the whiteboard isn't accessible to them and they can't do that. And they have to do that in front of the whole class. And then finally, I'm working on writing an interactive fiction game called the Desert Island Game. And that will eventually be part of the case library. That's quite an undertaking. So that was going to take a little bit, but I have a little teaser I can read for you here. Give me just a second. You just want to survive. Beyond the universal worries of ninth graders everywhere, you're stressed about doing high school without Mrs. Stein. Since preschool, she's told your general ed teachers what to do. They're clueless about blind students. And she's made sure you have Braille. But Mrs. Stein's retirement will be the least of your worries after the first week of school, when you're exiled to the desert island. To survive the next 175 days, you must discover the hidden rules, develop survival skills, and master the mischievous tips. And you better maintain a 3.25 GPA. Colonel and Dr. Strong won't accept anything less. No breaks for blind kids in the Strong House. So that's what we've got coming to you from Ally Inside. I'll hand it back over to Anna.
Thank you so much. It's really exciting work. Yeah, excited to hear about that. We are going to next, I'm going to go ahead and pin you. We're going to next turn to a quick spotlight from Fikayo Olutomiwa. She is a graduate student in creative technologies. She is a recent graduate as of a couple days ago of creative technologies at Illinois State University. So congratulations to her. With experience in web design and motion design, she is passionate about storytelling through technology, particularly in the realms of motion design, digital art, and animation. And I have been very lucky to work with Fikayo over the last, is it 2 years? Yeah, over the last 2 years, she has just led efforts for our Education Now Lab website and all of our interactions, and also for our School of Teaching and Learning over these years, and making those sites also more accessible. So really, really excited that she has been able to graduate and she gets to share with us some of that work that came out of that.
Thank you. Thank you for the really, really nice introduction. So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. I hope everyone can see that. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just going to introduce the capstone that this was my final year capstone for my graduate studies. And so I'm in the School of Creative Technologies, and I've been working on this basically for the whole year, so all of 2024. And then at the beginning of this year was kind of when I was able to display and get reactions and interactions to what I created. So my capstone project is titled Ankara in Motion. So I'm just going to take you through my process and what I did all of last year. So the first thing is, what exactly is Ankara? So Ankara, which is also known as African wax print, is a vibrant textile. So it's basically characterized by very bold patterns, and then it's a staple across all of West Africa. So there's West and Central Africa, and there's nowhere that you will go that you wouldn't see it. So if you walk on the streets of Nigeria, if you go into a store, anywhere that you're walking, even just watching the movies too, you will see these prints worn on everyone. And I don't know if there's necessarily a saying, but it's kind of one of those things where Nigerians were probably wrapped in Ankara fabric when we were born. So that's very how quintessential it is to the culture. And so basically Ankara in Motion, my capstone project, is a multimedia installation. And basically what I was trying to do was reimagine the vibrant patterns through motion design. So motion design is basically just animation. So animating the shapes and the colors and the patterns to see what I could do with that and how I could incorporate technology into that. So on the technology side, I was using projection mapping and augmented reality. And I was basically just trying to blend digital animation with those physical textiles and there's different forms of digital media to kind of see what I could get out of that. And so for the installation specifically, it consisted of painted portraits that I did them digitally, and then the patterns, animated patterns that were projection mapped onto physical, plain fabrics. And so now the next question is why? So why did I do this in the first place? So one of my main reasons for doing this was because I wanted to centralize African narratives, and I wanted to encourage other Africans that are into art or design or whatever form that they're doing to also, kind of be able to share our culture in the way that we only Africans can, because I feel like African culture has kind of been either diluted or just not explained with the nuance that it deserves. So that's basically just like my way of trying to represent African culture, specifically Nigerian culture, through my art. And then I also wanted to kind of find ways to preserve Nigerian culture through technology and design, which is something that I'm passionate about too. So for my inspirations, I had a lot of people that I kind of combined together to make this. So two of the artists here, Yinka Shonivari and Tonya Neji, both of them are from Nigerian descent, but I think Yinka Shonivari is actually in the UK, but he uses Ankara like a lot in his sculptures that he creates. And then Tonya Neji too, she's Igbo, so she's from I think, eastern parts of Nigeria. She uses their traditional fabric patterns in the paintings that she creates. And then also Florian Deluge. So his is kind of just like mesmerizing animations was kind of what I was taking inspiration from. And the next people is Frank Sorbier. So he also did, I think it was in 2013, he did a fashion show where it was also just like projection mapped patterns onto the clothing, like dresses that he made. And for the portraits, these weren't inspirations as much as when I created the portraits, people told me that they were reminiscent of these artists. So that's Lisa Butler and Amy Sherrill. And if you would notice Amy Sherrill's painting of Michelle Obama that they did when she was the first lady. And so going into my design process, so for the animations, I used After Effects, and in doing this, it was a very iterative process, and it took me a while to kind of get the hang of everything. But what I started with was to add, I chose 3 to 6 like traditional patterns that were really popular, Ankara patterns. And then I basically like digitally recreated them. So I used Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop to try and like recreate the patterns themselves. And then After Effects, I used that to animate it. And with that, something that I didn't add to the slide was like I had to storyboard a lot for each one. I had like multiple storyboards that I had to decide and try and figure out what would like work best for it visually. And yeah, so these are just some of the animations. Some of them made it into like my final installations and some of them didn't. So, but that's kind of how the creative process works. And I also went into, so after I created my first, I think 6 animations, I started testing the projection mapping aspect. So to explain projection mapping, you're basically using a projector to project an image onto a wall or a surface. And then in this case, I was trying to project it onto a plain shirt and then put the animations there so that it would look as if like the patterns on the shirts were animating. So what you will see is like with projection mapping also, there's a software called Mad Mapper where you have to kind of cut out the shape of what it is. So in this case, I had to cut out the shape of the shirts and the like little circles that I had with each animation on the top of it. And then next was the AR portrait. So these ones I drew, and this was kind of just like my sketches and then trying to figure out which patterns worked for which portraits. And yeah, so that's kind of it for that. And then just going into the installations really quickly, I kind of displayed it in a lot of places these past few months, but I think the slide, it's the videos. I'm not sure they are working. I'm not sure I'll be able to. Can you see the videos? I'm not sure if they're showing up.
Yes, I can see the video.
Oh, okay. So this is basically just the video of it animating. It's only 35 seconds. And I just have like the definition of Ankara there. And what I liked about doing it, because I was trying to decide on what text I wanted to add initially. But what I liked about this was try like give it being a first stepping point for anybody that is interested in like knowing what Ankara is. Like you have to know what the definition is, before you can actually go and like kind of get into like what it represents for the people that wear it. And then the next one is the AR portrait. So this is just one of the AR portraits that I did. So with AR, it's basically augmented reality. So with this one, you have like a QR code and you're using your phone to scan the QR code, and then you're placing it in front of the portrait itself. And then you're able to actually see it animated, because like on a still photo, like it's still, so you don't actually see what anything moving there. And I think it was a way to kind of show like how diverse, you know, Nigeria is, and how diverse the patterns are, and like even the animations themselves too. And then the next one is kind of just images of the installations that I had with, yeah, all the different Ankara displays and animations. And also this one too. And going into future work, I'm hoping if, you know, maybe I get funding somewhere, or if I get more inspiration, I would want to continue like incorporating interactivity into it, where you have camera tracking and like viewers can actually interact with it more. So like the animations are moving, or they're changing as like people are moving around it, or like the animations are being displayed onto the individual that's like viewing the work, so that they become a part of the piece too. So that's more or less that was a very quick rundown. And a little thing, if you have an iOS device, I have one of the portraits on here. So if you have like an iPhone, an iPad, you can just quickly scan the QR code and maybe see the AR. Hopefully that doesn't really take us too much over time. But yeah, I hope that I can continue to work on this. And I'm happy with where I was when I started this. And I hope that I can continue to bring Nigerian culture into like the pieces that I create, and like anywhere that, you know, I end up. So thank you. And thank you to Dr. Smith for allowing me to talk about my capstone project. So I really appreciate this opportunity.
It's working. So leave that up there for another second for people to, to go and try. You have to accept and open and
yeah, it's a lot of loading. So I was hoping that I was talking fast enough to get to this part.
Yeah. So thank you so much. We're excited about that, and that you can share that. So we'll go ahead and keep moving on. You can leave that up for just a minute. Oh well, okay. Check it out. It's okay. we'll keep moving on. All right, so thank you so much, Fikayo. We're so excited to hear your work, and congratulations again on your graduation with your master's degree. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to our special guest tonight, Charles Logan. So he studies how educators and students develop and practice critical digital pedagogies and literacies, how they resist, refuse, and revise educational technology imaginaries. And this is where I learned the most from you, and also design learning experiences to support educational dignity. I have gained so much from Charles' work over those last few years. If you are on Blue Sky, make sure you follow him, because not only does he digest current events and articulate them so powerfully into what it means for our daily lives, but also shares an incredible amount of open access resources, collections that he's been working on for years, and shares those repeatedly. So I'm going to drop a few links well, in case you don't drop any tonight, of some of this work. Most recently, he was featured at the American Educational Research Association at one of the presidential sessions, and he's going to be sharing some of his, I believe it's your doctoral work that you've been doing and almost done with, right? All right, tonight with his talk, and I will find that title one more time, looking back. It's after, right? Yeah, here we go. After the capture of AI literacy, teaching ecological approaches to AI.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Smith, and thanks for calling out my terminal online life on Blue Sky. It is just such a treat to be here, and thank you to my colleagues here for sharing your work. It's really inspirational, and really feel honored to be here. It's like the work that I'm going to present, it's more of a talk than a research talk, which is kind of a relief for me. And it's less connected to my dissertation, although it's all sort of one big project. So let me share my screen and then I'll get started. Okay. Okay. All right, let's see, it's loading. Everyone can see that okay? Okay. So the title of my talk is After the Capture of AI Literacy, Teaching Ecological Approaches to AI. And I want to start by returning to a document from a few weeks ago from the Trump administration, the executive order advancing artificial intelligence education for American youth. And the term AI literacy appears twice over the course of the document. First, in section 2, this policy statement, and the screenshot here reads, "It is the policy of the United States to promote AI literacy and proficiency among Americans by promoting the appropriate integration of AI into education, providing comprehensive AI training for educators, and fostering early exposure to AI concepts and technology to develop an AI-ready workforce and the next generation of American AI innovators." A lot to unpack. For example, what does appropriate and inappropriate integration of AI into education mean? But we see that AI literacy is really positioned as this vehicle for accomplishing a policy goal. In section 6 of the document, under the subtitle, Improving Education Through Artificial Intelligence, the document reads, A, to provide resources for K-12 AI education, agencies represented on the task force shall seek to establish public-private partnerships with leading AI industry organizations, academic institutions, nonprofit entities, and other organizations with expertise in AI and computer science education to collaboratively develop online resources focused on teaching K-12 students foundational AI literacy and critical thinking skills. The task force shall promptly announce such public-private partnerships on a rolling basis as they are formed. Again, AI literacy being positioned as foundational, sort of essential to this project of K-12 AI education. An important thread that I'm going to kind of pull on here also is the different sort of partnerships that the Trump administration and the Biden administration prior to the Trump administration were seeking to kind of marshal the resources to really scale up AI education. I'm going to problematize a bit some of these relationships, these partnerships, especially as related to AI literacy. So where are we going today? I'm going to offer a short history of AI literacy, the emergence of the term, and sort of how it's been conceived over time. It is by no means a thorough literature review. There are plenty of those out there. And then also going to share 2 problems as I see them, one about soft governance and the other of this notion of capture, which is going to be a focal point of my talk. And then offer a kind of parallel project. I want to say up front here that I don't view AI literacy, or particularly critical AI literacy, as separate from or somehow not part of mapping the ecologies of AI and generative AI. But I do think this ecological approach possesses some attributes that traditional AI literacy, particularly captured AI literacy, just isn't capable of doing. So I'm going to talk about specifically labor and the labor that has gone into and continues to go into making these technologies possible. So what is AI literacy? I'm going to offer 3 different definitions. The first comes from Konishi in 2015, which my understanding was the first time that the term AI literacy is used. And it was actually in a series of posts about the Japanese economy. Here may involve, quote, recording your mother's recipe as digitized text. When a cooking robot becomes reality in the future, having the data for one recipe could lead to a new business of reproducing home-cooked meals, unquote. People should also, quote, constantly examine whether the information we possess has the potential of generating high value added, unquote. And we should, quote, be emotionally prepared to let go of tasks that AI can perform in our place. I read this quote and I am terrified. Maybe horrified is a better word. This is a picture of my mother-in-law and my eldest child making cookies. And I see this image and I think of just sort of all of the sensory memory that goes into rolling out the dough with that rolling pin. The smell that I imagine my daughter is sort of taking in, not only of the ingredients, but of her grandmother behind her. And so it is an embodied learning experience that I believe should not be something that is pursued as, quote, the potential of generating high value added. So for me, this very early definition of AI literacy is entwined with this notion of, generating profit. And the question is, profit for who? Potentially, if you are a small business owner, you might reproduce, as positioned here, these home cooked meals. But ultimately, I would argue that the organization, the companies who are going to benefit from this are the same big tech companies who have sort of continue to sort of destroy our democracy here in the United States and around the entire world. So I'm deeply skeptical of this approach here. Later on, we get Candelhofer and colleagues in 2016. So the next year, my understanding is that the first appearance of AI literacy in a peer-reviewed article. And here, AI literacy is, quote, it allows people to understand the techniques and concepts behind AI products and services instead of just learning how to use certain technologies or current applications. And for me, there's sort of an evolution here that is worth noting, that, right, it's not just about using these technologies, but also understanding the techniques and concepts behind them, right? Getting under the hood, if you would. And I think that's important for young people and for people of all ages to understand how these technologies work. The technology, or sort of the purpose of AI literacy, the authors continues, they say, jobs will largely be related to AI, as it will be the basis of the products where our future wealth will be built on. In parentheses, smart production, Internet of Things, autonomous driving, robotics. This is 2016. Many of these predictions are just wrong, right? Autonomous driving is sort of this, it's always around the corner if you just give Tesla more money. Smart production, Internet of Things. I don't know about you, but I don't need my toaster to have software updates in order to operate. I just needed to put down my bagel in the morning. That's all. And importantly, that pronoun our future wealth, I think the question is, who is the our included? Who is the assumed group that is going to accumulate that future wealth? And how has that actually played out from 2016 to 9 years later? I would argue that AI has not been a democratizing force. I think it is very much entwined with projects of fascism, as we see Doge going about its wrecking of the federal government. And importantly, that Candelhofer et al., and I would say this is a common problem as I see it in AI literacy, is that it's a vision of AI literacy rooted in what they call, quote unquote, classic literacy, or the development of reading and writing skills. And so there are problems with this definition of AI literacy is rooted in classic literacy. It evokes Great Divide theories of literacy, in which literacy was conceived of as a binary of literate versus illiterate, to strengthen the assertions of white Western dominance over oral cultures and their literacy practices that did not conform to, quote, civilized modes of communication. And this is a problem that I think plagues a lot of not just AI literacy, but digital literacy. If you look at definitions of AI literacy, they often assume that people possess AI literacy, or that AI literacy is sort of a subdomain of digital literacy, and that most of these formulations of computing-related literacy rarely contend with the multiple meanings of literacy and literacies, plural, and how literacy and literacies are situated sociocultural practices. And there have been a number of papers. I wrote a chapter coming out with Jenny Higgs and Perry Vakil, and then also work that sort of problematizes one more iteration of literacy, this time attached to AI. Long and Majorco have a very influential, or highly cited, I would say, definition that they offered in 2020. To their credit, they do acknowledge, drawing on the work of Paulo Freire, that literacy is entwined with efforts to repress and liberate. And then they go on to define AI literacy as, quote, a set of competencies that enables individuals to critically evaluate AI technologies, communicate and collaborate effectively with AI, and use AI as a tool online, at home, and in the workplace. So again, as I see this definition, I think there's an important move to critically evaluate. Again, what do we talk about when we talk about critical? Is it sort of critical in the sense of evaluating something's trustworthiness, or is it critical, again, in the tradition of Paulo Freire, and interrogating how power is flowing through these technologies? Often it's the former, not the latter, but at least it's there. And so again, though, this sort of assumption that AI is going to be and potentially should be a tool that is ubiquitous, online, at home, in the workplace. And again, whose sort of vision of AI and its technology does this serve? So there are some challenges then that literacy scholars have named in terms of using these competency models. So one, it becomes a kind of decontextualized checklist. Here are the things that a person needs for to be considered AI literate. And that's often not from sort of the ground up situated use of these technologies, but from an external group. And also we see that there's limited usefulness of a skills-based approach to digital literacy. Again, which I would say AI literacy is kind of an extension of. And here we see work from Phil Nichols and Amy Storniolo, and they write that, quote, these competency-based approaches to digital literacy, quote, strain to accommodate the political and economic flows that underwrite contemporary digital activities. And I think it is so important that we name for students and we work with students to understand these political and economic flows, because they're often ignored or kind of waved away as inconsequential. So how does big tech exercise power through technology-related literacies? One, as I said, is through the problem of soft governance, or the process phenomenon of soft governance, which we can think about as the following. So, quote, digital literacy, as a relatively new iteration of literacy in general, is part of the governance mechanisms by which new modes of technological infrastructure impose certain kinds of power by foreclosing alternative ways of thinking and being. I was a former high school English teacher, so I like metaphors, although you don't have to be a high school English teacher to enjoy a good metaphor, I should say. And so here we have an aerial image of a sort of peninsula, right? And we see the rocks on either side of the image here, and then different paths. And we can think about this, right, as different ways of being, of thinking and being, right, of moving through the world, of learning, right? And that we as teachers and students want to have the kind of freedom to move about. And yet what this problem of soft governance does is that if you have a tech company come in and say, now we're all going to be using this app, or we're going to use Class Dojo as the classroom management system that is going to really mediate all of our interactions in the classroom, there really becomes one way to move. So here we have a red arrow pointing one direction, and it is this foreclosure of different ways of being and thinking that happens with the problem of soft governance, and it's the tech companies who can really decide this is the path that we're going to follow, that you are going to follow, teachers and students. And so that is one problem. Another problem is this notion of capture. So what is capture? It helps us understand this question. How does big tech use AI literacy to further concentrate and wield power? So a bit of a context here before I talk about capture is that, big tech companies here, we have two, these are tweets when I was back on Twitter 2 years ago, that this is for Google for Education, is saying, unlock the power of AI, this hashtag AI Literacy Day. Again, we see familiar tropes, right? Personalized student learning. If folks haven't read Audrey Waters and her book, Teaching Machines, The History of Personalized Learning, we see that this is a to sell technologies. And then we have another tweet from Google saying the Gemini era is here, and Gemini is their large language model, bringing the magic of AI. I recoil anytime I see the word magic referred to, or AI referred to as magic. It's not magic; it's a statistical model. And so I'm thinking about, what is the kind of work of the word magic doing here, right? To envelop AI in this sort of mystical sheen, and also sort of reinforcing asymmetrical power. I would argue, like, here we have like the great and powerful Oz, and we citizens are left to sort of wonder about this technology. So the problem of capture, it's a really wonderful article by Phil Nichols and colleagues. And they write this, that quote, the adaptability of literacy leaves it vulnerable to co-optation, to construct literacy pedagogy in relation to AI platforms, necessarily concedes the indeterminacy of literacy education's speculative project for those driving platforms' technical and political economic dimensions. So again, here we have this power of these tech companies to determine what does AI literacy look like. We're going to use our proprietary platform, or if you're going to use it, we're going to determine how you should use it, how you should not use it, and in doing so, sort of serving their own political and economic means and ends. So what does this look like in practice? So Common Sense Media, which is, I think, owns or sort of runs Common Sense Education, a very popular site for caregivers and for teachers. They produce curriculum. They partner with OpenAI to help teens and families safely harness the potential of artificial intelligence. That language comes from a press release from Common Sense Media. Importantly, OpenAI is not a neutral player here, right? That they are heavily invested in this framing, right? That teens and families can and should safely harness the potential of artificial intelligence. And so this was, I think, January of 2023. And then a few months later, maybe in 2024, time is squishy. They publish through Common Sense Education AI literacy lessons for grades 6 through 12. And they frame them as quick grab and go lessons to help your students think critically about AI and its impact. Again, that word critically being employed there in ways that I would argue it's more about evaluating the outputs of the tool rather than questioning the fact that OpenAI helped craft this lesson. And so here's one of those lessons. So this is all openly available. You can sign up and get a Common Sense Education account. But this lesson, which is part of a series of slides that Common Sense Education provides to educators to then show to their students. This is a lesson, as you can see in the upper left here, it says how AI learns. And here we have an image of a robot surrounded by what appear to be 3 male presenting people showing the robot books, talking to it, right? We get these speech bubbles and the robot is sort of taking this all in. There's a green ovals around the humans and a blue oval around the robot. And then the text on the slide reads, the robot in the middle represents artificial intelligence. It's surrounded by people who are talking to it and showing it books. These people are the human trainers. If you were to encounter this either as an educator or as a student, you would have a, more or less kind of, okay, that's how AI is made, great. And it's also an inaccurate view of how particularly ChatGPT was trained, because this is how ChatGPT was trained, right? This is a screenshot from the Guardian. It's got an image here of Thama, which is a third party that OpenAI partnered with in Kenya and hired local Kenyans to train ChatGPT. And the quote at the top says, "It's destroyed me completely," unquote. Kenyan moderators decry toll of training of AI models. And the subtitle is, "Employees describe the psychological psychological trauma of reading and viewing graphic content, low pay, and abrupt dismissals." So these are very different views of how AI learns and how AI is trained. And so I would argue that OpenAI is invested in teachers and students internalizing the version that makes no mention of the Kenyans who underwent this psychological trauma, because if they students and teachers knew about it, they may not, want to safely harness the power of AI. And so this for me is a captured AI lesson, an AI literacy lesson, because it serves, right, the political economic goals of OpenAI. OpenAI has sort of laundered how the technology is made through common sense education. Again, a powerful and well-respected nonprofit. And so this is the kind of ecosystem that I think we need to examine. And one way to do that is through an ecological approach to AI and generative AI as an effective means for learning, rather than from a position of with right away, that we start using these technologies right away with our students, but that we learn about and against the technologies. So Kate Crawford, in her wonderful book, The Atlas of AI, argues sort of topographical, which I think of as sort of synonymous with ecological, but she writes, quote, "A topographical approach to AI offers different perspectives and scales beyond the abstract promises of artificial intelligence or the latest machine models." And I think a good representation for this for educators and education researchers comes from Phil Nichols and Tero Garcia. And they lay out this platform studies and education tree that we see, the leaves at the top are the social dimension. The kind of trunk in the center is labeled the technical dimension. And then the roots are the political economic dimension. And typical, AI literacy, even, computing education may focus on the social and technical aspects. So things like the content, let's analyze the outputs of Claude or any, name your model for either the text or the images and how it reproduces bias. And that is important. I want to acknowledge that. And, the technical, let's look at the algorithms that sort of produce these biases. Well, what data was used to train the algorithms? What, are the sort of ethical issues of, these tech companies, using all of our data without our permission. But importantly, this ecological approach also allows us to interrogate and intervene in political economic dimensions. And I draw your attention to that material resources part, because now we're talking about the mining of rare earth minerals that gets into some of the environmental harms, as does the supply chain, the cloud servers that, right, the work of the word cloud, right, in obfuscating that the cloud is very much material. Think about data centers and the types of pollution that local neighborhoods have to deal with when you have a data center down the street, and also importantly, factory labor. So an ecological approach, I think, does the work often of AI literacy and critical computing and critical AI literacy, but also importantly adds this political economic dimension. So again, if we return to this slide from Common Sense Education, what might an ecological approach to AI look like if we were to interrogate this slide with our students? Well, we could ask, where did those books come from, right? As we know, Meta and OpenAI and all of these companies, right, used pirated, novels and film and all of these, right, Studio Ghibli, and all of these works of art that they did not have permission to use. They are not paying people for their labor. And yet, right, it appears in this image from Common Sense Education and OpenAI that these books are just sort of unproblematically used by these trainers. And importantly, who are these people, right? Because as I believe that this image is an inaccurate and potentially purposely so portrayal of how AI is trained, how ChatGPT is trained. So who are these people? Where are they living? And this would open up conversations around what's often referred to as ghost work, and this global network, often in the global South, of folks who are doing, who basically make the internet possible through different sorts of labor that they're doing around content moderation. They're also organizing in important ways that I think folks can learn from in terms of fighting back against tech companies. And again, that is all off screen here in this current version, but an ecological approach, I think, invites us to ask these questions. And also, right, is this, as I said here, an accurate portrayal of labor conditions? And it's not. And And I think it offers us educators working with young folks to then take an ecological approach to interrogate not just existing curriculum, which I think that would be a great way, but also start from these questions and then sort of move towards an analysis of the kinds of materials that OpenAI and Microsoft and others have published. So in short, here's my meme to end the night. We've been hurtling down this highway towards often a captured AI literacy, right? We know from the Trump administration being very close with big tech companies and venture capitalists like Mark Andreessen that the vision of AI literacy is not a critical one, big C critical interrogating power, right? That the vision of AI literacy put forth in the executive order is one that is going to serve tech companies and in their continued rightward march towards fascism. And so we have this opportunity now to think about our own context, what this work might look like as researchers, teachers, students, caregivers, what sort of community partnerships and coalitions can we build to take ecological approaches to AI, because I think this is a really urgent thing that we need to be undertaking. And excited to continue this work with folks here and elsewhere in the coming years. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If you don't mind sharing some of those contact info, because we took it off the screen really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much. I've been posting in the chat some links to some of your projects. And thank you for bringing those so much for us to think with today. We're going to, we decided right before the call started for everyone else that we are going to take Q&A here, but we wanted to sandwich Charles' talk with some of these spotlights. So we're going to have one final spotlight. It's going to be shared by Viraj Patel. And after that, then we're going to have some Q&A time. You can use either the chat to post questions that you have, or if we have the QA option down below, you can use that too. But you could also just use the chat. If you have questions, you can go ahead and start posing those. We're going to hear from Viraj Patel here. He's going to be talking to us about a public scholarship initiative that he and Fikayo and I worked on this year. It is with the journal of the Literacy Research Theory, Method, and Practice Journal. So go ahead and Viraj and tell us about that. And while we're doing that, you all can post questions in the chat, and then we'll go from there.
All right, this is great. I really enjoyed all the talks that we've had so far, so ignore all the tabs that I have open. I'm sure they'll go away here in the next 2 or 3 weeks or so, hopefully. So let me share a little bit about the Public Scholarship Initiative. So announced in, so we started doing this work last fall, and started rolling out some materials for the Public Scholarship Initiative. So authors who had submitted their articles and got the articles published in Literacy Research Theory, Method, and Practice had the opportunity to work with us for a public scholarship initiative, which, as Dr. Smith mentioned, Fikayo, myself, and Dr. Smith worked on it together. The goal of the public scholarship initiative, or sort of the ethos, is to make scholarship accessible to individuals, right? So we often think about research, we often think about scholarships as things that we do in our day-to-day practice as individuals who may be researchers, who are educators. However, when we're thinking about these practices, thinking about these research endeavors, we're not only doing them within communities, but we're thinking about them in terms of how might they impact communities? How might community be able to use some of these research? So one of the goals that we had of the Public Scholarship Initiative was to communicate sort of the applicability or the use of research for the general public. And in doing so, we collaborated with authors who had their articles published in Literacy Research, Theory, Method, and Practice, in order to develop specific social media, as well as specific digital media, I should rather say, which were disseminated across social media as well as several other platforms. So in more than one ways, what we did was we asked the authors to think about specific audiences who they would want to communicate with. So I'll walk us through an example. I think that would be one of the best ways through which we can talk about what the Public Scholarship Initiative was designed to do and how it went about doing this. So let's take a look at this article here. It's by Gillian Mertens and Brittany Adams. So evidence of emergent expertise in early career teachers, information literacy practices on teachers pay teachers. So if you're an educator or if you're a teacher educator, you may have heard of the website Teachers Pay Teachers. It's one of the websites that a lot of student teachers or teachers may often visit in order to get materials to teach, in order to learn a bit more about some of the pedagogical artifacts that they may use in their own teaching practices. So in this particular article, Gillian Mertens and Brittany Adams wanted to take a look at the ways in which specific teachers interacted with Teachers Pay Teachers. And in order to communicate some of the findings that these authors had, we helped them curate certain certain digital media, which were then disseminated over social media. I could play a clip of a particular media so you can take a look at what it may look like.
You describe that while you're playing that, Viraj.
Sorry, what'd you say?
So I'll go ahead and describe it while it's playing. Here. Oh, it just looks like it froze.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you're seeing, one of the things that we tried to do as we were designing these materials, as well as talking about them, we wanted to have some tangible points that these that individuals who would interact with this media on various digital platforms could take away. So these points then became a way in which we could ask these specific users to consider the ways in which specific research articles, in this case, a research article about students' practices on Teachers Pay Teachers, could in turn be of interest to them. Specifically with the idea of providing them the ability to think about how research may be applicable in their own practices. In doing so, one of the things we were able to do is communicate with different audiences. In this case, it was teachers. We have articles, or we worked with the scholars where we talked about articles which would be accessible or applicable rather to parents as well as their children in facilitating culturally relevant conversations within their homes, talking about specific culturally relevant books. And in doing so, we were able to reach a wide variety of audience and make scholarship a bit more accessible to the public.
Great. So sorry, I had meant to just describe what was on the screen. So what was on the screen was a video that had some of those takeaway points specifically for teacher educators in how they can think through their own positioning and that ecological approach of understanding Teachers Pay Teachers. So that's what was on the screen when Viraj was playing that video. All right, thanks, Viraj. So thank you for that. Let's see if we have any questions we can open up to that. I can also, because we are now a smaller group, if people do want to request to just ask their question live, and this could be for any of our spotlights and including Charles' talk here too. So you can ask your question in the chat, or you can ask me to unmute you, but you are going to be on camera. I'll chime in a question for you, Charles. So one thing that I keep running across is that we when there is some actual education about how AI works in the larger ecological like approach, understanding the environmental dimensions, the biases dimensions, the harms, you know, like the multiple aspects of it, the corporate gain, right? One thing I'm finding is that often those things will be mentioned and then we'll say, okay, now let's go use it. And I haven't seen much guidance on how to operationalize all that knowledge, that more broader understanding. Have you seen examples, or have you been finding ways that people then actually act on those things?
Yeah.
So in addition to like refusal, which is what I'm trying to do, right? What are some of the other things that people have been doing?
So I mean, I can tell you how I approach it in my own teaching. Superior Vakil is my advisor, and we've taught this class on AI equity in public education that I think you posted in the chat. You know, we do sort of we take an ecological approach. We do an audit of ChatGPT in which they're learning about these different dimensions, many times for the first time. Although I was really encouraged to see in Teen Vogue recently, I think this week or last week, an op-ed by one of their lead writers about the environmental harms of the technology. So I think a lot of young people are coming to classes kind of knowledgeable in ways that wasn't true maybe a year or two ago. I think our approach has been ongoing reflection. And so to be asking folks, you know, you're gonna learn about these technologies. We don't ban them. And I am sympathetic, and I support folks who do refuse to let people use the technologies in their classrooms. But so one of my dissertation studies is looking at sort of the impacts of sort of taking this ecological approach and how it affected people's use or disuse of or revised use of the technology. Because what I want to do at the end of the day is like present an accurate view, not just present, but really like wrestle with these questions alongside students, and say, you know, here's where I have landed for myself. You know, I hope that you aren't fully embracing sort of everything that Sam Altman has to say, like as face value, sort of equipping them with this skepticism that, you know, folks at Civics of Technology have talked a lot about, you know, this techno skepticism, and really helping young people and students of all ages to like cultivate this techno skepticism and have a series of questions to ask. And we saw that, you know, over time in that sort of reflection, right, in this, again, critical technology consciousness, it is that some people stop using ChatGPT altogether, or other large language models, generative AI. Others were using it in a much more narrow use, so they were no longer turning to it as like an internet browser, or sort of what they describe as sort of frivolous uses of it. There was education that was happening. So there were a few really wonderful, you know, as a room full of educators, like nothing warms your heart more than like to have a student come in and be like, I talked to my mom last night all about this thing, or like my friends and I, like they were using this and I said, hey, it's not great to do that. And so there's some like education that's been happening, folks talking to family members, to friends. And then, you know, so I think that is sort of where I am, and how you know, I want to engage in this ethical sense making with folks, and let them come to their own conclusions, because they are unique agentive human beings, and I don't want to foreclose those futures to them if they're going to use these technologies, but I do want them to, you know, have to do that sense making and arrive at a place where they feel comfortable using a technology, because right, there's no sort of, I'm certainly not like a purist when it comes to these technologies. Like, you know, my children are, you know, definitely glued to iPads when I have to fly with them, you know. So, you know, I think that my approach to teaching about it is to engage that ethical sense making and allow for that space of reflection. And that's how I have landed at my pedagogical approach for now.
Thank you. Others can chime in too, if y'all have. Natalie,
Yeah, I'm curious how others approach this question.
Earl, here I see Earl's line. I'm gonna unmute you. Let's see. Let's see. Allow. Let's see. I'm gonna see if I can change your setting here. Earl, I think you can talk now.
Hello.
Hello. I don't know if I can get your video on fast enough, but you can speak to us.
Okay, yeah, you can just put it on in the middle.
Okay.
Are there are kids present or young ones? Can I curse?
Not in the vicinity that I can tell here, at least.
Okay. So, so I definitely appreciate a lot of the techno skepticism brought up around the AI stuff and the much more kind of complex and comprehensive ecological perspectives that we've also discussed. Do you because this has sort of come across my my feed on a couple of occasions. Do you feel as though there is any value to the ways that these technologies might be forcing us to reconsider the ways that our current social institutions, in particular education, are patterned? And I'll make that more specific. Because ChatGPT and its relatives are almost the perfect bullshit machine, right? They are designed to produce bullshit. Is there value in realizing that this bullshit machine is now forcing us to reckon with how many of our schooling practices are actually also patterned around the social practice of bullshitting? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just wish it didn't have to, take the imposition of these technologies for us to really contend with the, a system that rewards bullshitters, right? I imagine other folks saw that New York Magazine article that was went viral last week about, again, it was a student who was writing about Paulo Freire and critical pedagogy and didn't connect the fact that she was using ChatGPT to write this essay. And again, I think students are often demonized as a result for using these technologies, but it's the systems that you said, Earl, that have rewarded this really just sort of surface level learning. And so of course they're going to use these tools, and I don't blame them often. But yeah, it's just, I wish it didn't require these technologies to get us here. We went through the height of COVID where we were, and that was an opportunity to sort of really reimagine what teaching technologies might look like, and we were now are here, and so I'm hoping that people take up the challenge, and that there are institutional resources available to people to experiment in their pedagogies. So you're not teaching 250 students, an adjunct to teaching 250. Like there are real material institutional investments that have to be made. Unfortunately, and I know where you teach, Earl, you have systems who instead are entering into $17 million contracts with OpenAI, where that money could be spent in a lot better ways, in my opinion. So I don't know how others also, I don't need to be the person who answers. I'm curious how others are grappling with these questions in your own context.
Yeah, so here, let me lower my hand. Hold on. There. So yeah, I mean I've been thinking about this a lot, and I just commented in the chat. I have a 26-year-old and another kid who's just graduating college this weekend, and we've had all sorts of conversations about this and the use of AI and the whole purpose of the education system. And it strikes me that for those of us who've been doing this for 30 or more years, it's like it's been, I mean, I remember conversations when like Michelle Noble and Colin Lancashire came out with their seminal work on new literacies, that it's that same notion of old wine in new bottles, that really it's still this underlying system of education where it's not really, that we need to question what it's really about, right? Like what people are being prepared for and who's being prepared for what kind of labor and what kinds of roles in the world. And so in some ways, I'm just sort of seeing that happen again. And yet, as someone who's not well versed, as you all are in AI and digital literacy technologies, part of me also thinks like, but maybe something's different this time. Maybe something's new. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I do think something that's new, and there was another presidential session at ARA, and it was professor at USC, her last name was Birch, I can't remember her last name, but it was like she was making the argument that unlike other technologies, that these companies, and this happened arguably before AI, are just, there's no public oversight of them, and they're just sort of getting into schools and school systems in ways that mark the technology as different, but also reproducing, similar tropes and narratives around disruption, and Silicon, making another run at transforming education with AI this time. It's really gonna happen. And so yeah, that it feels both new and also like we've been here before. But there does seem more existential. Maybe it feels that way because that's the media, I think, often sort of feeds into that narrative. But I mean, we've all been in classrooms. Like, maybe it does feel different. There's something different this time.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I thought there was some newness at some point, and then quickly the facade fell down. And I think I shared your hype assignment in the chat too. I thank you for creating and then making that publicly available as well. I think that's a good one for people to do, to kind of interrogate our own sense of what it is versus what it actually is. It's a great important piece to